It was the day I finally decided to take charge of my life. One of those rare moments when everything just falls into place. Or so I thought. I had been living in my newly purchased house for almost a year now, but something about the area did not sit right with me. The streets were spotless, the neighbors polite but distant, and the air was always thick with unease, like a storm waiting to break. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened next. I had just returned from a business trip, walking up the driveway with the luggage in hand, when I noticed a small group gathered near my front door. At first, I thought it was a group of neighborhood kids playing, but as I drew closer, I'd see that they were not kids at all. The group was led by a woman in a crisp, immaculately pressed suit, her blonde hair tied back in a way that screamed power. She was holding something in her hands, something formal. As I approached, I heard her speaking in a voice that was too confident, too commanding. "We need to talk about your house now," she said, as though it was the most natural thing in the world. I froze. This was not just any neighbor. This was Karen. And Karen was not just a name. It was a status she wore with honor. She was the homeowner association president, the kind of person who believed she had the right to control everyone's life. "Excuse me, what is going on here?" I asked, trying to maintain my calm, but I could already feel the heat rising in my chest. "We have been notified that you have made several changes to your property that are against neighborhood regulations," Karen continued, looking at me like I was a lawbreaker. "And frankly, you are violating our community rules, which will result in serious consequences unless you pay up." Pay up? What did she mean? My mind raced, trying to assemble what she was saying. I had barely touched the house since I moved in, except for some basic repairs that did not even require any special permissions. There was no way I could have done something wrong. "I have not done anything wrong," I said firmly, but the pit in my stomach kept growing. Karen's smile widened, as if she had been waiting for me to say that. "Well, we have a resolution then. We are requesting a charge to cover the necessary adjustments to bring your property up to homeowner association standards. It is a one-time payment, of course. Think of it as a community expense. It is the only way to settle this smoothly." It hit me like a punch to the gut. She was asking me to pay rent for the house I already owned, not just for the land, but for the right of living in my own home. I could not believe what I was hearing. "You want me to pay you for my own house?" I said, my voice trembling with shock. Karen nodded, unblinking. "That is correct. And if you do not pay, we will be forced to take official action. It is for the good of the neighborhood, after all." My blood ran cold. Official action? This could not be happening. I had heard stories of homeowner association misuse before, but never this obvious. They were literally forcing people for doing nothing more than living their lives. But I was not going to back down. "Okay," I said, pretending compliance, "I will take care of it." But in reality, I had no plan of paying her a cent. I turned and walked into my house, my heart racing. As I closed the door behind me, I realized something. Karen had misjudged me. This was not just a fight for my property. This was going to be warfare. I stood in my living room, staring at the letter Karen had given me. It felt like my entire life was suddenly in danger, and I was just trying to process everything. I had already spent countless hours improving the house, pouring my heart and soul into it. Now this woman, this homeowner association dictator, was trying to take control of my future in this neighborhood. The audacity. I paced back and forth, my mind racing. I knew I could not just roll over and give in. There was something deeply wrong with the way she was running things. But how far would she go if she was willing to demand charges for my own home? What else was she capable of? The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. It was not long before I started making calls. I contacted a legal expert to get his opinion on this so-called community fee, and the advice I got was as annoying as it was enlightening. According to him, the homeowner association had no legal authority to make such a demand. It was nothing more than a clear scam, and if I stood my ground, they would be forced to back off. But this was not just about the money. It was about my right to live peacefully in my own space without some power-hungry woman trying to control me. The legal advisor advised that I gather as much evidence as possible. Document everything. He said take pictures of the property, record every conversation, and keep every letter she sends. That was the plan. I started jotting down every meeting I had with Karen, keeping track of her ever-changing rules and demands. I made my way to the local documents office the next morning to check the legality of her claims. I wanted to see if there was any truth behind her supposed community fee that the other homeowners were apparently paying. What I found shocked me. There were no fees like the ones Karen had been mentioning. The homeowner association was running a completely different fraud altogether. Feeling both enraged and empowered, I decided it was time to confront Karen. I had all the evidence I needed, and I was going to show her that I was not afraid. I knew I had to approach her carefully. This was not going to be an easy conversation, but I also knew I was not going to let her get away with this. The next day, I marched up to her house. She had a perfect white picket fence and a lawn that looked like it had been taken directly out of a residential dream. She was sitting on her porch sipping a beverage as if she owned the entire block. "Karen," I said, my voice firm as I stood at the edge of her porch. She looked up from her magazine, eyes narrowing when she saw me standing there. "What is it now?" she asked, not even attempting to hide her irritation. "I have looked into your demands," I began, showing her the stack of paperwork I had brought, "and it turns out you have no legal right to bill me for anything. This is just an extortion scheme, and I will not be paying." Karen's face contorted in an expression of pure disgust. "You are just another one of those troublemakers," she spat. "You think you can just walk away from this without penalties?" "I'm not walking away from anything." "You are," I said, slamming the paperwork down onto the table, "because I am going to the media with this. I'm going to expose everything you have been doing. You have no idea who you are dealing with." Karen laughed, but there was no amusement in it. It was a low, threatening chuckle. "You think you can scare me?" she asked, standing up and walking toward me. "You think people will actually trust you over me? I have been in charge of this neighborhood for years. I have influence. I can make your life a living nightmare." Her words pierced, but I stood my ground. "We will see who has the control once this hits the news," I said calmly, my heart pounding. "But mark my words, Karen, you will regret this. I will not be the one backing down this time." She glared at me for a few more seconds, her nostrils flaring as if she was considering her next move. Then she turned on her heel and marched back into her house, slamming the door behind her. I did not feel triumphant. I did not feel like I had won anything. But I knew one thing for sure. This was far from over. Karen had just underestimated me, and she had no idea what I was capable of. The next few days were a storm. I had contacted a journalist from a local news agency explaining everything that had happened with Karen and the homeowner association. Corrupt tactics. She was intrigued, but also doubtful. After all, people like Karen usually had their way with local communities, and the idea of an outsider going up against her was bound to raise some eyebrows. But I was determined, and the journalist promised to look into it. I was not about to sit idly by while Karen deceived everyone around her. I spent hours researching homeowner association regulations, browsing through community rules and regulations, and digging into past complaints. There was nothing in the official documents that even remotely resembled the community fee Karen was pushing. In fact, her actions were starting to look even more doubtful. That is when I started getting phone calls. At first, they were from neighbors who wanted to know what was going on, wondering why Karen had come after me. Then some of them began reaching out privately, saying they had been afraid to speak out, but did not agree with what Karen was doing. The more I heard, the more I realized I was not just defending my house anymore. This was larger than me. Karen was taking advantage of people, and it was time for someone to challenge her. One afternoon, I received a sudden visit from one of the neighbors who had called me earlier. It was Mrs. Stevens, an elderly woman who lived down the street. She had always been quiet, rarely leaving her house, but she had a name in the neighborhood for being sharp and well aware. "Can I come in?" she asked, her voice shaky but firm. "Of course," I said, stepping aside. "What is going on, Mrs. Stevens?" She looked around cautiously, making sure no one was listening. "I have been living here for over 30 years, she began, sitting down on my couch, and I have never seen anything like this. Karen has been running the homeowner association with an iron grip for years. No one dares to question her because she has links with people in the local government. But you are different." I raised an eyebrow, confused. "What do you mean?" "She has been trying to pressure everyone to comply with her rules, even if they are not in the books. I have had to pay extra fees just for basic upkeep. She should be covering, and I know other neighbors have been forced to do the same," she said, her voice breaking. But no one has ever had the bravery to fight back before the impact of her words sank in. Karen had been doing this for years, and I was the first person to stand up to her. I was not just confronting her, I was going to bring down her entire system. But this was bigger than I thought. The more people I talked to, the clearer it became that Karen had been abusing the entire neighborhood for her own profit. "We need to stop her for good," Mrs. Stevens said, her eyes burning with resolve. "You are not just fighting for your house anymore, you are fighting for everyone who has been silenced by her." I nodded, the pieces falling into place. This was not just about proving Karen wrong. This was about taking down someone who had been controlling a whole community. I was not going to let her get away with it any longer. "I will take care of it," I said, my voice firm. "We are going to expose her, and once we do, no one will ever believe her again." Mrs. Stevens smiled, reassured. "You are the first person to ever stand up to her, and I will do whatever I can to help." As she left, I sat back down on the couch, my mind spinning. I knew that now more than ever I had to win this, not just for myself, but for everyone Karen had hurt. I was going to take her down, and I was not going to stop until I did. The following days were spent gathering every piece of evidence I could find. I knew Karen was not going to go down without a fight, so I made sure to prepare every angle. I had already started recording conversations with her discreetly enough that she did not catch on, and I kept every letter she had sent me. The more I collected, the clearer it became. Karen was operating outside the rules. Her community fees were not just illegal, they were blackmail, and I had the proof to back it up. But I knew I needed more. A few of the neighbors who had reached out to me were eager to help, but they were too afraid of revenge from Karen and her allies in the homeowner association. I could not blame them. Karen had a way of making people feel like they did not stand a chance. It was how she stayed in control. The community had been living in fear for too long. That is when I decided to go public. It was a huge gamble, but it was the only way to expose her for who she really was. I called the journalist from the local news station and told her everything. She was uncertain at first, but as I laid out the facts and showed her the papers, her tone changed. She agreed to meet with me the next day. When she arrived, I could see the shock on her face. She was expecting a typical Karen story, but this was different. The proof was undeniable. The homeowner association had been abusing its power for years, and Karen was the leader. I felt the surge of energy as she snapped pictures of the files I had laid out on the table. "This is unbelievable," the journalist said, shaking her head. "I cannot believe no one has come forward before." "People have tried," I said, my voice tight, but Karen made sure they were too scared to speak. "She has TIs, and anyone who challenged her was made to look like a rebel. But I am done being quiet." She smiled at me, a look of respect in her eyes. "You have got the story of a lifetime. Here, we are running this for the first time in weeks." I allowed myself to feel optimistic. We were going to expose Karen and her corrupt homeowner association, and there was no way she could talk her way out of this. But Karen was not going to make this simple. The moment the article was published online, phones started blowing up. Emails, calls, even texts from people I had never heard of. The story had gone viral. The entire neighborhood was in an uproar, and Karen was nowhere to be found. I could already feel the pressure on my back. This was the chaos I had been expecting, and I had no idea what Karen would do next. Just as I was about to sit down for dinner, the doorbell rang. I opened the door, expecting it to be another neighbor wanting to express support. But to my surprise, standing on my doorstep was Karen herself, her face a mask of rage. "You have made a huge mistake," she said, her voice low and menacing. "Think you are the one who made the mistake, Karen," I replied, crossing my arms. "The truth is out, and there is nothing you can do to prevent it." She narrowed her eyes. "You do not understand what you have started. You think you can take me down? You have no idea what you are up against. The homeowner association has more influence than you think." I was not shaken. "It is over, Karen. The whole neighborhood knows the truth. Now, you are finished." But she was not done. "You think you are the only one with hidden facts," she hissed. "I will make sure this goes down in ruins for you. You will wish you never challenged me." Her words sent a chill down my spine, but I did not show it. I was not going to back down. "Do your worst. It is already too late for you." Karen's expression darkened into something worse. "We will see about that." She turned and stormed off, slamming the door behind her. But as she walked away, I'd feel the heaviness of her words. She was risky, and she was not going to give up easily. The following week felt like a storm of activity. The news article had sparked a chain reaction. Calls kept coming in. Some were encouraging, some were threatening, and some were from people who had been living in the neighborhood for decades, waiting for the right moment to finally speak up about Karen's oppressive rule over the homeowner association. But while the community seemed to be waking up, Karen was not going to take this lying down. It started with small acts of revenge. My mailbox was wrecked. My car got a strange scratch on it, and I noticed that someone had even poured something on my lawn that looked suspiciously like herbicide. At first, I tried to brush it off, thinking I was just imagining. But soon enough, it became clear Karen was taking this fight to the next level. But I was not about to let her scare me. I had already gone public. I had my neighbors supporting me, and I was gaining more allies every day. I knew it was not going to be easy, but I was determined to see this through. One night, as I was sitting at my kitchen table trying to organize all the evidence I had gathered, there was a knock at the door. My heart skipped a beat. I was not expecting anyone, and the last time Karen had knocked, it had not ended well. I walked to the door, pulse rising, and opened it cautiously. To my surprise, it was not Karen standing there. It was Mrs. Stevens again. But this time, she was not alone. She was with another neighbor, a man named Greg, who had lived in the area for years and had always kept to himself. "We need to talk," Mrs. Stevens said, looking over her shoulder uneasily. I let them in immediately, sensing that something was off. Greg looked nervous, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. But Mrs. Stevens was determined. "Karen is losing it," she said, lowering her voice. "She is getting desperate. I do not know how much longer we can keep this hidden." "What do you mean?" I asked, fear growing into my voice. "What is she doing now?" Greg finally spoke up, his voice shaking. "She has gone to the mayor. She is trying to get the entire neighborhood behind her, saying that you are causing problems and that your actions are disturbing the entire community. She is pulling favors in the local government. I have heard rumors she is planning something bigger." My stomach dropped. If Karen had the mayor in her corner, this could get worse. She was already influential enough within the homeowner association. Now, she was involving local officials. This was not just a battle for my house anymore. This was a struggle for everything I believed in. "We need to reveal her, and we need to do it fast," I said, standing up from my chair. "I am not backing down, but if she is pulling those kinds of connections, I will need more than just the neighborhood behind me." Mrs. Stevens nodded. "Seriously, we have been talking. We want to help. We want to make sure that Karen is finally defeated once and for all." Greg pulled out a small folder from his bag and handed it to me. "This is everything," he said. "Pictures, documents, and most importantly, testimonies. There are others who are willing to come forward, but they are scared. They want to remain unnamed for now." I took the folder, my fingers trembling. It was full of evidence, just like the one I had compiled. But this was more. This was the final push I needed to bring Karen down. I looked at both of them, feeling a surge of appreciation. "Thank you," I said quietly. "This could be the key to stopping her. But we need to be cautious. We cannot just go to the press again. We need to hit her where it matters." Greg nodded. "I have got a friend who works for the local media. If we go to them with everything, we will get the story out there. But we have to make sure Karen cannot twist it. We have to control the story." I felt the pressure of the situation settle over me. We were finally gathering the resources we needed, but this was about to get a whole lot more serious. I was not just fighting for my home anymore. I was fighting for the community. And if Karen had her attention set on the mayor, I had to be ready for whatever she planned. "I will get the story to the press," I said, clenching my fists. "But first, we need to get the local authorities involved. We have to make sure Karen does not get away with this." As the evening wore on, we planned our next steps carefully. We could not afford any errors now. The pace was building, and the stakes had never been higher. Karen was more dangerous than ever. But I was not backing down. This fight was not just for me. It was for everyone who had been silenced by her schemes. The war had just begun. The final battle was inevitable. I could feel it in my bones as I prepared to present everything we had. Documents, witness statements, and hard evidence. I knew that it was not just about me anymore. It was not even about Karen. It was about the entire neighborhood. This was bigger than a simple homeowner association dispute. This was about breaking free from years of misuse and fear. The day I had been preparing for had arrived. Mrs. Stevens, Greg, and a handful of other neighbors who had bravely agreed to speak out were by my side. We had one opportunity at this, and I was determined not to let it slip away. We were all gathered in the conference room of the local news agency. The cameras were rolling, the reporters were ready, and I could feel the pressure of the moment pressing on me. I took a deep breath as I stood in front of the camera. It was now or never. We have been living under the control of a dishonest homeowner association for far too long, I began, my voice steady but strong. Karen has been using her position to deceive and exploit homeowners in this neighborhood. But today we are putting an end to it. The camera crew zoomed in as I held up the stack of documents, the proof that had been compiled over the last few weeks. I watched as the reporter, a young woman with an air of professionalism, nodded. She knew this was big, really big. "We have gathered statements from neighbors who were too afraid to speak out until now," I continued. "We have documented Karen's attempts to blackmail homeowners, to dominate their lives, and to use the homeowner association as a tool for her personal benefit." As I spoke, I could see the reporters' faces shift from mere curiosity to genuine surprise. The story was developing before them, and they could see just how far Karen had gone to maintain authority over the neighborhood. There was no way she could reject it now. This was not just one person's word against hers. It was an entire group. The story aired that evening, and the reaction was instant. Social media exploded with reactions, both from locals and from people around the country who had seen the corruption unfold. The homeowner association, which had been shielding behind Karen's controlling rule for so long, was now under the spotlight. People began sharing their own struggles with unfair homeowner associations, and the encouragement flooded in. But Karen was not going to go down quietly. The next day, as I was sitting at my kitchen table, a knock came at the door. I opened it, half expecting to find Karen standing there, furious with anger. But it was not Karen. It was a local representative, a delegate from the mayor's office. "I'm here to speak with you," he said, glancing at the camera crew set up on the lawn. "I am afraid things have grown much further than expected." "What do you mean?" I asked, my heart pounding in my chest. "It is not just about Karen anymore," he said, his voice low. "We have got politicians and other officials involved now. The mayor, he has been receiving pressure to bury the story, and the Homeowner Association Board has rallied against you." The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. They were trying to hide the truth. But this was not just my fight anymore. It was the fight of every person who had been harassed, manipulated, or silenced by Karen and the corrupt homeowner association. "I am not backing down," I said, my voice firm. "We have the truth on our side. The people of this neighborhood will not accept this any longer." The representative nodded, though his expression was still serious. Just be careful. You are up against more than just Karen now. You are taking on a system that has been in place for years. As he left, I felt a flame ignite inside of me. This was bigger than any one person. I had uncovered a network of corruption that stretched far beyond the homeowner association. And now, it was up to me and all of us to destroy it. Later that evening, I received another call from the journalist who had helped us uncover the story. "We have got more recognition than we ever expected," she said, her voice excited. "The mayor is in full crisis control mode. Now, he is trying to twist this. But the truth is out. You did it. You revealed them." But just as I thought the battle was over, I received a shocking call. It was Karen. I almost did not answer, but something in her voice made me listen. "You think you have won?" she spat. "You have only touched the surface. You have no idea what is coming next. You have made a huge mistake." I took a deep breath, knowing this was the final confrontation. "Karen, it is over. People see you for what you are now. You cannot scare anyone anymore. Your rule is done." There was a long pause before she spoke again. This time, her voice was quiet, almost defeated. "You think you have won, but you have not. Not yet." I hung up the phone, a sense of closure settling over me. I had exposed Karen, and the community was uniting behind me. The truth had won, and it was only a matter of time before the entire structure came falling down. In the weeks that followed, the homeowner association board was dismantled, and Karen's authority began to fade. The mayor, under immense public pressure, had no choice but to step down. People started to express, finally free from the fear that had held them captive. For so long, the neighborhood slowly returned to normal. But this time, it was different. The people had spoken. They had taken back their rights. I had won, not just for myself, but for everyone who had been afraid to speak up. And as I stood in front of my house, watching my neighbors come together, I realized that I had done more than bring down a corrupt homeowner association president. I had helped create a community that would no longer allow anyone to control them. It was not just my triumph. It was our victory.